Okay. I see the recording is started. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm especially pleased to announce that our interim commissioner, Kevin Brown, is with us today to give us some open remarks and welcome everyone. I'd just like to say that Kevin's done an outstanding job in this interim role. As soon as he took over, seemed like everything started crashing in around us, but he's done an outstanding job leading us. And Kevin, if you would, we'd like to hear from you now.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My grandmother always would say that things happen in threes, and I'm just waiting for the plague of locusts to descend upon the state. It's been a very trying few months, and I appreciate everyone's work, particularly those in the school districts that are out on the front lines, doing things you never thought you would do when the school year started, but you did them. I have an affinity for CTE. I was a CTE student in high school, even when I was advised not to do that because back in those days it was seen as not compatible with other tracks. So I've always respected the work here, and it is an essential part of our work, and I'm glad to see it more integrated in our high schools. But we know we have a long way to go for that, which is one of the reasons we have this advisory. So, and the advisories now are always important, but particularly during a time of crisis that we're facing. I just want you to know how valued this is for us. We are really utilizing the feedback on all the advisories as it relates to COVID-19 since we're in a new era. So I want to thank you for that and for your efforts. So I'm not going to continue talking because you all have a very hefty agenda, and I know there's a hard stop at 2 o'clock. But I know CTE folks are efficient, so I imagine you all will accomplish everything. I have to slip out around 1 o'clock for a short conference call with the cabinet, and then I'm going to be back on until you end your meeting at 2, and then I've got to jump on the superintendent's webcast. So again, if I'm not showing up, it means I'm either off or I've got my camera turned off, but I've been trying to attend all the advisories. It helps me, even though I am a short timer, my time's starting to run out as interim. I've enjoyed the challenge, but I'll have to say I'm ready to hand this over to the permanent commissioner. We will likely have a permanent commissioner the way the schedule is going, probably sometime in mid to late July through early August. It looks like that the board's moving right along. So without further ado, David, turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Ms. Baxter, if you would you do a roll call of the members? And if you wouldn't mind, if you can turn on your camera when we do the roll call, we'd appreciate it.
Okay. We're going to start the roll call, and if you can, just give us a minute to tell us about yourself. So we'll get started on that. Melissa Aguilar. Steve Johnson.
Good afternoon. This is Steve Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Government, Community, and Legislative Affairs for Owensboro Health over here in Owensboro, Kentucky. Obviously, it's the largest private employer west of Louisville. We do a lot of programs, do a lot of supporting of both CTE as well as other higher education. Very proud of Owensboro Community Technical College here in Owensboro, and certainly appreciate having the opportunity to provide input to the advisory panel as well. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Kyle Kelly. You may be on mute. Kyle Kelly. Lee Lingo.
Hi, this is Lee Lingo, Executive Director of Kentucky Association of Manufacturers. We're proud to be able to participate in this continuing advisory committee meetings. Career and technical education obviously is critical to the long-term success of our industry and is more so every day. So we're happy to be part of this.
Thank you. Harmony Little.
I'm here, Director of Career Pathways with the Kentucky Community Technical College System. Work a lot with many of the fine folks on this call in the dual credit arena.
Thank you. Mike Miller.
Hey guys, Mike Miller, principal at Mayfield Graves Area Technology Center. Glad to be with you today, and we're learning with everybody else new ways to deliver instruction down here in Graves County, but it's good to be with you.
Thank you. Rayanne Miller.
Good afternoon. My name is Rayanne Miller. I am a career and technical education teacher who teaches family and consumer sciences. I teach at the Jessamine Career and Technology Center in Jessamine County.
Thank you. Paul Mullins.
Paul Mullins, Superintendent of Schools here in Logan County, and we recently opened a new Career and Technical Center in Logan County. So anybody that wants to visit a state-of-the-art new facility, we'd love to have you.
Thank you. Christina Slattery. I think she's not able to attend. Mike Stone.
Good afternoon. I serve as the Executive Director of the Kentucky Association for Career and Technical Education. We represent teachers and administrators at all levels and in all disciplines of career and technical education. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Johnny Ray Turner. Max Wise. Darlene Zybert.
Hello, this is Darlene Zybart. I am calling in. I had some trouble logging in, so I'm listening on my phone. I'm the CEO of the Kentucky Society of CPAs, and obviously education and pipeline development are very important to us, and we feel is something that can help elevate all of us. The better educated our students are, the better off we will all be. So very happy to be here and participating today. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll circle back around to Kyle Kelly. He's sitting in for Drew Graham. I know he was on here earlier.
And Kyle, you may need to hit *6 on your phone to unmute yourself. Sorry about that.
All right. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Kyle Kelly, Director of Local Affairs for Kentucky Farm Bureau. And Drew Graham just wants to say he's our Executive Vice President. Hello to everybody. He had a conflict at this time, but did want to give his regards and say thank you for the invitation and letting Kentucky Farm Bureau be a part. So thank you all.
Thank you. I believe we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Baxter. We have 4 presenters today, and I'll let them introduce themselves. First is Leslie Slaughter.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. I am the executive advisor, not director, of the Office of Career and Technical Education and Student Transition at the department. And thank you for engaging with us today in this meeting.
Tom Thompson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Thompson, Division Director for Technical Schools and Continuous Improvement in the Office of Career and Technical Education and Student Transition.
And Pam Moore.
Good afternoon. My name is Pamela Moore, and I am Division Director for the Division of Student Transition and Career Readiness, and it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
And Kylie Whitaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Kylie Whitaker, Assistant Director in the same office as the rest of us, and I work for Tom and his division.
Thank you, Kylie. If we could advance the slides, I think our next order of business is approval of minutes. I think we sent the minutes of the last meeting out with the invitation. And I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion, Paul Mullins, Logan County Schools.
Thank you,
Harmony
Paul.
Little, second.
Thank you, Harmony. Any questions or discussion or corrections? If not, how about if I say anyone opposed? Could you please signify by saying opposed? Otherwise, I assume everybody votes yes on acceptance of the minutes. Kylie, can we move the slides on into the agenda? Okay, next on our agenda is the makeup and rotation of our CTE advisory committee members. And KRS 156-806 is, as it shows here, requires representatives from business, industry, KCTCS, the Department of Workforce and Investment Commissioner, and any other individuals deemed appropriate. And so, as you can see, we've got business and industry, and we've got teachers. We have some ex officio members, the CTSO members, student members that we have had when we've had in-person meetings, and they add a lot to those meetings. And I think even our State Board of Education is considering adding student members to their board. So what has happened with transition in the last couple of years? Yeah, you can go ahead to that if you'll pull up the makeup. This is the makeup of our advisory committee as it stands now. Representative Carney, as everyone knows, has been very ill, and we had asked Senator Max Wise to sit in on his behalf since they're in the same town. And he schedule, I guess, wasn't where he could be here today. And you can see who the representatives are in terms of where they're from and who they represent. The terms expiration, the way things have turned out, we haven't really done anything with that, and we're in between commissioners, and we thought we would wait till our new commissioner is on board, and then we would take some recommendations to them. As you see in yellow there, we have a couple of new items. One is a second teacher rep. We have one teacher, Rayanne Miller, who has been representing local districts, and we thought it would be good to add an ATC teacher rep in the second spot, because those are two different systems. One has about 40 some schools and the other about 53 at the moment. Paul Mullins, Dr. Millay retired, and Paul was kind enough to accept replacing Dr. Millay in his seat, and we appreciate that. Carmela Clark was a principal in the area technology centers, and then she came to KDE to work in our certification areas. So that left an opening for Mike Miller as principal from the Mayfield Graves Area Technology Center to fill her spot. The other new spot we wanted to add was the LAVEC principal is the local district career and technical centers that that receive funding from the Department of Education. So that way we have representatives of both state operated and locally operated schools. So that's kind of our proposal. We thought we might talk about terms expiring. We were thinking about turning it over every 2 years on an alternating basis. We also have the permanent membership seats that you saw, and those would be KCTCS, the KWIB, and the Education and Workforce Development Cabinet. So that's the makeup right now, and part of what we're doing today is we kind of wanted to get your feedback on what you thought about maybe some of these changes. And so a lot of what we've done, there's a lot of freedom given to us. So do you have any ideas or anything that you'd like to add that would help us improve the makeup of this committee?
This is Harmony. I don't know if I'm sure you're aware, there was an announcement this morning from CPE that they just hired somebody for P20 relations. She used to work with you all. Her name escapes me, but I can probably find it in the email.
That's Amanda Ellis, Dr. Ellis.
Since she's going to be part of her portfolio is dual credit, as well as focusing on the smooth transition from high school on. She might be a good person to add.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's a new position, I believe, that Dr. Thompson's added over there, the P12 liaison with CPE. That's a good suggestion. Anyone else have any ideas that they'd like to share? Well, we'll move along. If you have any other ideas or suggestions, feel free to give those to us after the meeting or on your feedback at the end of the meeting. And we're planning on taking this back to the new commissioner, and maybe in our fall meeting we can finalize some recommendations we can take back. Okay. So we want to, COVID, I know everybody's tired of talking about it and especially tired of dealing with it, but and I know Paul has been involved in a lot of what we've done with superintendents, but and some of you do, but I wanted to kind of give you a gist of what we were doing today with what's going on in CTE since all this started. So if you could pull up the next slide, please. I think when we first began, the first case was in Harrison County, and we have an area technology center there. And so we were involved from day one with the decisions the district was making there to shut down and get moving to NTI. And the ATCs, since we'd served multiple centers, NTI was not something that we had been doing. Also in our office, our telecommuting was limited to 1 day per week for most people. And we had 3 field staff that telecommute 100%. So with the commissioner's guidance, KDE started with a 1 day, all day telecommute on that Friday. And then the next week, I think we did 2 days to see if everybody had what they needed. Then we moved into full 100% telecommuting the following week. And we've been going like gangbusters since. And as everyone knows, I think we've been more engaged with each other through this process than before we started. And as Mr. Johnson said earlier, just the fact that he and Paul aren't driving 3 or 4 hours to meet with us today is a great thing for them. Perkins federal grant timelines, we were in the middle of having applications coming in and getting toward the end of the year when people need to be spending their money out. So we had to work with the feds to get some relief on timelines and some of the protocols. We extended some deadlines. There's a couple of other things in terms of carry forward extensions that the feds haven't loosened up yet, but we're hoping that we can accommodate everyone through the process, and I think we have. Also, I would mention that we have a COVID-19 page. You can go to our website, anything that you need to know, those things are highlighted on our webpage. But through it all, we wanted to make sure we continued our focus on students. And one of our biggest challenges, obviously, in career and technical education is when you're not in a lab, what do you do? How do you do the simulations and the hands-on? And what happened with us there is we had a lot of creative people. We had some of our teachers come on board and did a great job with that. So you'll hear more about that. Then we had to, we had our end of program assessment that we had to do. How do you finish dual credit? We worked with all our partners to figure out the way to take care of our graduating seniors, and then obviously help with our underclassmen that needed to do that. So I'm going to save the rest of that information for my colleagues to talk more in depth about. If we could have the next slide, please. I'm going to let Tom Thompson, our Director of Technical Schools, to talk about that in more detail. Tom?
Thanks, David. So, like David said, we've got the 53 area technology centers, and our extent of NTI, we didn't have our own NTI plan whenever this happened. Our extent of NTI was just helping the districts as teachers and sharing whatever information we had at that point. But you can imagine taking a classroom that is, or a lab that's typically a hands-on thing, and then turn it into an online environment. So they've really stepped up to the plate to that, and the office is really pitched in to make sure that we've had the resources that we need for that. I'm going to run through a bulleted list of things that we've kind of done to patch holes and to take care of some items as we went along, and some things that we just had to do to make ends meet. The first thing that happened to us, of course, right after we went into NTI, we had to cancel our regional principals meetings. We typically have 2 of those, one in the fall, one in the spring. And so we narrowed that down to some items that we just really needed to cover related to COVID-19, but also some things to keep us on track to be normal, in line with Perkins accountability as well. We updated our certified evaluation plan to address limited in-person meetings. Of course, it's spelled out that our summative evaluation meetings had to be in person, and so our 50-50 committee met. We updated the 1920 plan, and then we left that same language in it for the 2021 plan. It just states that in the event that we can't do in person, that we can do it in a virtual platform as long as we can see each other and share evidence. We created the first emergency Kentucky Tech NTI plan to get us started. And again, those plans, our NTI plans, lean heavily on our districts. So our plan is a bare minimum, and we try to follow the districts that we feed. Now, that's pretty hard for some schools, considering they feed into, 7, we have maybe have 7 feeders sending to one area technology center. Now, some of them only have 1, some have multiple, just 1 or 2 feeders. But for those that have several, you can imagine with the different districts doing different things, that can cause some headaches there. One thing that we've asked the principals to do is we've asked them to make sure that they're reaching out to their districts now because of the different scheduling possibilities and different closure possibilities, to make sure that we have an open line of communication to be sure we can address those things efficiently and quickly as they happen. And if you can imagine, if you do have 5 feeders, if they're all sitting at the table at the same time, having this conversation, and we can move at the same time, then that sure is helpful. So we've asked them to do that. We created the 2021 Kentucky NTI plan, Kentucky Tech NTI plan, and that's going through the approval stages now. Once it's approved, it'll be sent out to the districts or to the ATCs. And again, it is supplemental to the district NTI plans. We try to follow them the best we can. Then ours will be minimum to fall back on. We ended up having to cancel. We had problem-based or project-based learning sessions that we were going to have in June. We ended up having to cancel those. And we're looking right now at having a vendor do those for us. That PBL Works is Buck Institute. And we think it is particularly important to continue to stress different ways of teaching and learning, and then PBL is a valuable resource in this type of environment. So we want to continue to support our teachers in that, and so we're looking at that for July now. Kylie, if you could go to, thank you, sir. So we have a Perkins project, leadership project. It's called OSHA 10 for CTE, and it's where we get our we have our Area Technology Center and Career and Technical Education Centers teachers certified in OSHA 10, so they can certify. It's a train-the-trainer model where they can certify their students in OSHA 10 in general industry and construction. And we ended up having to, we didn't cancel, but we moved the June meeting trainings to a virtual platform. And it is our hope that we can go ahead and do the July training in person. But if that doesn't, then we'll work with our universities to get that moved back to a virtual platform if we have to. The new Teacher Institute tomorrow and Friday will be, or Thursday and Friday will be having their face-to-face. Typically they're face-to-face, and we've moved that to a virtual conference. So all new occupation-based certification teachers will go through the new Teacher Institute. So we'll be enjoying an online conference with them. So we've created a budget request for the 10%, and so let me back up. So the CARES Act allowed for this other funding stream to go toward the districts, and Kentucky Tech is not considered a district in that the same general terms as the 172 districts in Kentucky is. So we were allowed to pull 10% of that ESSER funding back for state level projects. And so the ATCs fell within that 10% funding for the state level projects. And we ended up with about $4.45 million for the ATCs in several areas. Some of it was reimbursed for personal protective equipment that they donated at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of it is for technologies and computers to make sure that when we go into the fall, we'll be ready for remote learning. Some of it is to cover teachers to help with industry certifications during the summer, if we have an opportunity to do that. So there's quite a bit of money there to help with that remote learning, to help start school back up, taking care of sanitation, taking care of personal protective equipment, cleaning, the healthy scans for thermometers and that type of thing. There was also the Governor's Emergency Education Relief funding that went along with that. So there's $2,500 that'll go to the schools for it. Again, that was earmarked for remote learning and feeding. And obviously the ATCs don't do a lot of feeding, so we'll be doing most of that toward the remote learning part of it. And then one last thing that was a major change for us that we had planned in the spring was to do student and teacher surveys, and then we take that data from those surveys, and then we create professional development around career readiness and around how the schools operate. And we were not going to be able to do that in the spring, or we weren't able to do it. So we moved that into the fall, and hopefully we'll catch up on it. I think one other thing I'd like to share with you is, at this point, that's all the stuff that we've done, and a few things that we're going to do. We're really focusing now just to start working with our local districts to make sure that we're doing what we need to help support them. And then we've also pulled several program areas together, and some of our principals are actually leading some professional learning communities, to where the teachers are working together to come up with some lesson plans and things that they can use in the event that this happens again. So that's kind of where we are. If y'all have any questions on that, you can put them in the chat box or ask them now. All right.
Okay, Pam, would you?
Yes. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I just want to go over some of the work for the Division of Student Transition and Career Readiness. And there were components of the work that, from our perspective, were not impacted greatly by the COVID-19 crisis. And I'll start out with those, and then we'll talk about some of the challenges that we faced along the way as well. So the first one focused on the secondary to post-secondary and dual credit pathway alignments. And this is some work over the past year that the staff in our division has focused on in partnership with our post-secondary partners to identify those pathway alignments that lead to those critical industry certifications, certificates, diplomas, and degrees that are aligned to those in-demand industry sectors and support occupations. So this has been a partnership with post-secondary and business and industry. It provides opportunities of value for our students. So it was a very important piece of our work over the past year. But it also meets the requirements outlined in Perkins 5. So this piece of work was uninterrupted by the circumstances, and really the only delay that we've experienced thus far has been the final approval from post-secondary curriculum committees on, I believe, only one of our dual credit pathway alignments. The initial focus of the work was the alignment with program offerings at the Kentucky Community and Technical College system, and able to accomplish 28 of those pathway alignments, either as secondary to post-secondary pathway alignments or dual credit pathway alignments. So there has been one alignment done with Eastern Kentucky University in the area of engineering. And the intent of this work was really to provide models of alignments for the schools to use as they work with their post-secondary partners at a local level in the development of those local pathway alignments. The second item that, again, was basically uninterrupted for us was the work that we've done on the 21-22 CTE program of studies. While it's been a massive undertaking, I'm happy to say that we're in the final stages of review and on schedule to publish this document so that schools will have access to that when they begin planning for that following year, school year of scheduling. So this is a piece of work that, as we've gone through it, and I think the experience of COVID has driven this conversation to some point, but one of the things we want to do is look at how we can make this an automated process using existing resources. for future years. So that's something we're exploring with Scott Uselis and Kylie Whitaker and their group. So that's an exciting piece of work. We're also currently in the revision stages of the CTE Facilities Guide. This ends up being done about every 5 years, and we're right on schedule to do that. The last revision of that was in 2015. Basically, that's going to remain the same. There are a couple of new programs that will be added to that were in their pilot phase at the last publication of that document, or were basically classroom settings and not included in that facilities guide. So we're going to update to include those. And the other thing we have is there's going to be some minor changes to part of the plans that include some additional safety measures, such as showers in the areas where students may come into contact with any kind of materials that require immediate cleansing. The next item we have begins our discussion of the challenges that we faced with COVID-19. And the first one we had experienced was the cancellation of our technical upgrade trainings. We had 25 technical upgrade trainings scheduled they went from April to the end of June, and we ended up having to cancel 22 of those 25. So that's something that we've looked at closely in how we can provide some virtual opportunities. Of the existing trainings that we had scheduled for this year, we felt like 3 of them could be delivered in a virtual platform, and teachers provided the equipment that they needed. So we've had one of those take place already, and it was very successful. We have another one that's happening actually the end of this week, and then one more toward the end of June. So we're pleased with the fact that that first one was successful, and really feel strongly that these next 2 will be successful. One of the things that I would share is that there have been some vendors that have stepped up to provide some training opportunities free of charge to teachers that we feel like were very beneficial and linked closely to some of the types of trainings that we had to offer. And one strong example of that is what the Automotive Service of Excellence provided for automotive teachers so that they could maintain their ASE certification as they moved into the next school year. Additionally, they extended that. So if teachers wanted to do an in-person training, they've extended those certifications, I believe, by 6 months. But we've had teachers who have actually done the virtual training as well. Another thing around professional development and growth opportunities for teachers that we had to cancel this year were some of our professional development opportunities provided through the state leadership projects. We're looking at how we can incorporate some of those opportunities into the next fiscal year for those state leadership projects as well. Continuing on, a focus of the work this spring has been in gathering resources. That was one of the very first things that our program consultants took on to ensure the remote assistance to our teachers through the crisis period. Typically, the spring of the year involves a lot of on-site visits with program consultants going to schools and meeting with teachers, but we shifted that focus to gathering those resources, and consultants have communicated those out in various ways. They've put them in Google Classrooms that they maintain. We've also included that information on the COVID website under our program areas. All of our student organization conferences were canceled as in-person conferences, with the exception of DECA, which had occurred just prior to the onset of the crisis for us in education. The national conferences as well for the months of April through June have been canceled. In Kentucky, we're proud of the fact that our CTSO advisors and boards at the state level were able to offer some type of opportunity for our students, and that ranged from conducting just the critical business session that was required in the bylaws of those organizations, but we've gone from that extreme to the other where we're actually holding competitive events through online platforms, and we've got we've had instances where some of the CTSOs have had participants actually record their speeches or demonstrations, whatever area they were competing in. That was sent out to judges. And then award ceremonies were actually handled in a virtual setting. And then we've also got some that are doing live officer elections through a virtual platform, but they are actually conducting it much like what we're doing today in a Teams meeting where they're doing officer elections, competitive events, and there's been a big push on social media. So I think in that sense, the presence on social media has been a real asset to us. The next item was the cancellation of our student leadership camps. Typically June through August and September, we have leadership training down in Hardinsburg at our FFA Leadership Training Center. Those range from full week camps to weekend to 3-day camps. And one thing we've been able to do for FFA is to actually develop some leadership training modules that are going to be distributed. So we've pulled together a group of ag teachers. It's called the Kentucky Master Ag Teachers, and they are compiling leadership modules so that those can be used this fall with training and providing those leadership opportunities, not only for those students who are very active in our CTSOs, but also to be used in the classroom and link those to the implementation of the career studies standards. So there's been some neat opportunities come out of this for us, a lot of challenges also, but we're excited about the work and pleased with what folks have been able to accomplish.
So you can tell we've been pretty busy during the COVID-19 crisis. I think speaks volumes the work that's been able to continue with all the new and emerging work as well that has come from every office, including our own. I wanted to share with you all just some efforts that have strategically been put in place across the agency to be very consistent in how we are approaching our support to schools and districts and collaborating with our partners to continue that support. So David mentioned a moment ago the development of the COVID-19 web pages. If you have not had a chance to peruse those, I encourage you to do so. I have to give a shout out to our KDE communications team for the design of those pages and how they worked with every office to really create a very strong landing page for where we have a clearinghouse of information, guidance, resources, documents, all framed around the three buckets of work that Interim Commissioner Brown asked us to focus on throughout the crisis. And those buckets were educate, feed, and support. And so the information there is organized in a beautiful way, and it's a great resource for not just educators and administrators, but parents and even students. So that was one of the first things we were able to accomplish across the agency as the onset of the crisis began. The first week into the crisis, we also held a superintendent webcast. Superintendent Mullins was engaged in that, and it was hugely successful, so much so that we determined that those were probably needed on a more frequent basis. So we've actually been implementing weekly superintendent webcasts. Those occur every Tuesday at 2 p.m. And it's really just a chance for us to give hot off the press information, to share resources. It's a way that we bring in our partners to talk about new and emerging information or guidance that might be out there. But I think most importantly, it's a way for us to connect with and hear from our superintendents about how things are going, boots on the ground, and how we can better support them through the continuation of the crisis. So at the end of every one of those agendas, there's an opportunity, an open forum opportunity for questions and really just discussion. And then we're documenting the questions that come through in a formal way that I'll talk about in a moment, that are then shared out for everyone to kind of utilize as a resource and guidance. So in addition to that, Interim Commissioner Brown very early in the crisis wanted to create the Education Continuation Task Force. That is a task force that is comprised of all of our state agency partners, as well as what we call our K groups. So those are the Kentucky Association of, and then you can fill in the blank, right? Kentucky Association of School Superintendents, Kentucky Education Association, KET, et cetera. But this task force has been an incredible tool for us to be able to vet the guidance and the work, the projects that were ongoing at the department, to get feedback on that work. They are a wonderful sounding board for us, and it's really a way for us to ensure that all of the services we are providing and all of the support we're providing to schools and districts is very comprehensive, and that it's I think very efficient across all of the agencies and across all of our partnerships with our other state partners. So there's been a number of cross-agency teams that have also been developed at the department. You can see many of them listed there. So we do have a team that works solely on frequently asked questions. So you can imagine from about March the 12th on, the number of questions that began to flood into the department via email, over the phone, from a variety of stakeholders. And so we very quickly realized we had to have a way to manage that across the agency, get timely answers to those questions, and make sure we were being consistent and efficient across the agency and how we addressed those and produced guidance. So there's an outward facing spreadsheet on one of the COVID-19 pages that shares those frequently asked questions. So that's a great resource to look at as well. And again, it links appropriate guidance and relevant documents and resources. We've had to obviously produce a number of guidance documents as well. We have a ton of project management initiatives going on, not just to make sure that we're meeting milestones and deliverables, but really giving us a chance as an agency to reflect on lessons learned, things we might do differently if we find ourselves in this situation again. It's a really valuable way for us to capture some of those really important things to reflect on as we move forward. And then, as Pam said, we have a continued focus, not just in our office, but across the agency, in trying to capture relevant and timely professional learning opportunities for our educators that can be done in a virtual environment and platform because of the continuation of the crisis. So a lot of work in the office and also outside the office and across state agencies. So that moves us to our guiding question. David, do you want to take that?
Yes. We've really been very busy, as you can see, but we know there's some things that are still out there that people are struggling with, and we just want to know what if there's something that we have overlooked or something else that we need to be doing to be responsive, more responsive. If you have any ideas or anything that you'd like us to take a look at, we'd love to hear from you today. And if not, you want to think about it, you can get that back to us in writing or put it in the chat. We'll be just fine. So you want to go ahead and move to the next item on our legislative update, Leslie?
Sure, yeah. So just wanted to spend a few moments with you today sharing some legislative updates, specifically some outcomes from the 2020 session. I've chosen to only highlight bills that are going to have some type of impact on CTE. So for the interest of today's agenda, I'm just sharing a few things with you around CTE related bills. Number one, Senate Bill 101. This was sponsored by Senator Wilson. This is a bill that deals with articulation agreements. Many of you on this committee are very familiar with the articulation agreements we have in place. We've been at that game for a long, long time. And we have over 100 agreements actually as an agency with a variety of post-secondary partners, public, private, 2-year, 4-year, that spell out some of the credit for prior learning that our CTE students can be awarded once they enroll in those post-secondary institutions. So this bill is really aimed at just standardizing that process a little bit. It involves our partners at the Council on Post-Secondary Education, and they are actually the ones tasked with facilitating the process. So over the course of the next year, we will be creating that standardized articulation agreement process and working alongside them to make sure that that is done for every approved high school career pathway that we have that leads to that secondary credential, certification, licensure, or some type of degree. So I think the big takeaway from this bill is that it does help our students a lot in terms of portability, because they will be able, if they meet the criteria of the standardized agreement that will be developed, then they'll be able to carry that credit for prior learning with them to any public post-secondary college or university within Kentucky. So that's a great win for our students. Next one. Senate Bill 158. This is a very large bill that had a lot of impact on the K-12 system. But again, I'm going to narrowly focus my comments just on those that you will be more familiar with as your work relates to CTE. It did make significant changes to the statewide accountability system, a lot of our school improvement initiatives, state and local graduation requirements, charter authorizer training for members of local boards, and the achievement gap definitions and expectations. So specifically around accountability and assessment, it does change the indicators within our accountability system. And it does require that there be baseline data from the 2021 and 21-22 years that inform the implementation of this new organizational structure of the accountability system. So in the third bullet there, you can see what those indicator categories are. And then you can see that the second bullet actually requires that we not only report the progress of how we are doing at both the state, district, and school level on those indicators, but we also have to report any changes that are occurring in those indicators. So if you're familiar with our school report cards, when we developed our new accountability system several years ago, we created a data dashboard that articulates a lot of this data. So you'll see some changes in that are to come based on these new provisions that reorganize a little bit how that data is presented, and also add some greater detail than we currently have historically been providing in terms of change and outcomes. Next slide is a continuation of Senate Bill 158, specifically around graduation requirements. The provisions of the bill that speak to grad requirements actually prohibit the minimum requirements for high school graduation from including any type of post-secondary readiness indicator that's a part of the statewide accountability system, or any kind of minimum score on a statewide assessment. So that will have an impact on the prerequisites and the graduation qualifiers that are in our current system. And then it actually takes the provisions a little deeper and actually prohibits a local board as well from adopting any type of high school graduation requirement that includes a minimum score on a statewide assessment. So our Office of Assessment and Accountability and some cross-agency teams are working through these new provisions right now, and I'm sure more information will be forthcoming soon. Senate Bill 193 is a bill from Senator Adams that is focused on computer science. So this establishes a goal for increasing the number and percentage of students, particularly students in underrepresented groups, that are participating in computer science courses in middle and high school. So you can see the populations they're focused on there: females, minority students with disabilities, etc. So we are required to provide by December 1st of this year and every year thereafter a report to the Kentucky Board of Education, as well as the Interim Joint Committee on Education, that provides a lot of data around the computer science enrollments, as well as a lot of the initiatives that we have going on surrounding computer science. So we already have a report that we publish that is kind of a state of computer science address, and we see that report becoming just a little bit more detailed and will definitely be able to be provided to the State Board and the Interim Joint in that capacity. House Bill 352. So this is the executive branch budget for fiscal year 2021. So those of you that are familiar with the legislative process know that typically there is a 2-year budget that is passed, but due to COVID-19 and many of the unknowns that we're currently facing, the General Assembly chose to only adopt a 1-year budget. So what that means is that they will have to craft a budget for the second year during the next session or through a special session that could be called by the governor. So I just want to highlight a few of the provisions that will have a major impact on CTE. So we'll start with the next slide, Kylie, around the learning and results services category. So there are new provisions within House Bill 352 that deal with a local district's process for petitioning to assume control of a state-operated area technology center. So as you know, currently there are 53 state-operated area technology centers in Kentucky. Tom Thompson, who provided updates earlier, is the division director over the division that oversees those schools. So there has always been a process in place in statute that has allowed a local district to petition to assume control of a local center, of a state-operated center in their district. And so the provisions that I'm about to go over are new provisions around what that process might look like. So around funding and governance, first of all, the provisions within House Bill 352 say that once a petition is granted for local control, the local board will receive 100% of the ATC's allocated budget for the first year. In the second year, the local board is to receive not less than 75% of the amount that was allocated the previous year. So 100% in year 1, 75% in year 2. Previous language in a former statute said that if a local district petition was granted, they would get the current budget for 1 year, and then they would go into the LAVEC funding formula. LAVEC is the funding for our locally operated career and technical centers. I know many of you know that pot of money is much smaller in nature. And so this basically strikes the requirement that you have to go into that LAVEC formula and says that you will receive 100% in year 1, 75% in year 2. So that 25% that is left in year 2 from the previous budget is now required to be set aside in what I'm calling a side pot that will go to help fund the current districts who have locally operated centers that are not receiving state supplemental funds. So you've heard us discuss in previous meetings that we have about 8 districts that have locally operated centers that are not a part of the LAVEC funding formula. So this 25% that's left over from an ATC transfer to local control will go into a side pot to begin funding some of those unfunded local centers. Additionally, around the governance piece, the provisions of House Bill 352 do require that the district, the local board that is assuming control, must have an interlocal agreement with any of the other feeder districts to assure that access to that center will continue. So as you know, most of our area technology centers, the vast majority of them, provide access to more than one district. And so they would, in order to have a petition that is granted, would have to have an interlocal with those feeder districts to ensure that they're still going to provide access to those students. Next slide. There were some additional personnel provisions as well in House Bill 352 that speak to continuing service contracts for certified employees, principals, and classified employees. This language is different than what was in the previous statute. The former statute required that a local district who was granted a petition would have to keep those students, those employees for 1 year before determining whether they issue a continuing service contract. This language now says that upon the time of transfer, they may be granted a continuing service contract. There were some additional provisions in House Bill 352 that relate to the work of KIA, the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority. They administer the dual credit scholarship programs, so I did want to bring to light a couple of quick changes there. Many of you know the dual credit scholarship programs have a tuition rate ceiling. So any participating post-secondary institution that agrees to be a part of that scholarship program has to cap the tuition at what was previously 1/3 of the KCTCS rate. That ceiling, that tuition rate ceiling, has now been raised to 2/5 or 40%. So for students who are utilizing those scholarships for those dual credit courses, they will not really feel the effect of that change. But any student who may be seeking a dual credit course that is not on scholarship will see that difference in the rate of tuition that is out of pocket. Additionally, KIA has some reorganization for how they're going to administer the 2 dual credit scholarships. So there is the traditional dual credit scholarship, and then there is the Work Ready dual credit scholarship for CTE students that are in an approved career pathway. They are still allowing the same number of dual credit courses, so up to a maximum of 10 approved approved dual credit courses, 8 of which could be CTE, 2 of which can be Gen Ed. And so that will still remain the same, but they will be administered within the same umbrella of the traditional dual credit scholarship. And then in one provision within House Bill 352 that we thought was very thoughtful and very helpful for our students were basically some hold harmless language for the students who were enrolled in dual credit courses in the spring of 2020 for that semester. If in the event a student was not able to complete or had to withdraw from a course due to COVID-19 and not being able to maybe have access to internet or not having technology at home, they were not penalized for not being able to complete that course and can actually take the course again with the scholarship in the future. So I'm going to pause there because I see Harmony's hand. I think she might have a question or a comment.
Yeah, Leslie, I just wanted to clarify the dual credit scholarship, they can use it not just for Gen Ed, but they can also use it for a technical course.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Sorry if I didn't say that. Thank you. One additional piece of House Bill 352 that you don't see in my slides, but Kylie will be talking about, relates to LAVEC funding. So I just want to flag that, and he'll be coming back to that piece. Yeah, you're good, Kylie. There we go. Just a couple updates very quickly on federal legislation. So as we've already heard today, the CARES Act has provided some very important funding to our school districts in light of COVID-19. So there's been over $30 billion in emergency education funding that's been issued through the CARES Act to governors in each state, as well as state education agencies and institutions of higher ed. So the main K-12 funding sources are the GEARS funding, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, and the ESSER funding, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. So very quickly, I'll go through each of those and give you a highlight of how much money we've had coming. So next slide, Kylie. So 43 million has come to Kentucky in the GEAR funding. 30 million has been allocated by Governor Beshear for elementary and secondary education, and the remaining 13 to 14 million has gone to higher education. The governors have had a lot of authority to determine what priorities they wanted to place on those funds. And so for K-12, in terms of priorities, Governor Beshear asked that the funding really be utilized to continue the support of remote learning, as well as the continuation of food service. So as Tom Thompson mentioned earlier, each of our area technology centers, in addition to the 172 school districts, are going to receive funding to help offset some costs in these areas. So the ESSER funding was a much larger pot of money, about $193 million that has come to Kentucky. It is being distributed through the Title I Part A formula. The funds are flowing from the United States Department of Ed to the state agencies, and then we are disseminating it to the local school districts. As Tom mentioned, 90% of the funding is going out to local districts, and there is a 10% set aside that has been pulled back for some state level initiatives, including support for our state-run schools, which include the 53 area technology centers, as well as the Kentucky School for the Deaf and the Kentucky School for the Blind. And then the LEAs have a lot of flexibility in how these funds can be spent. Any activity that's currently authorized under A lot of the federal programs that you see there, ESEA, IDEA, Perkins, McKinney-Vento, as well as any other activities that directly rely on to response to COVID-19 are permissible uses of funds under ESSER as well. So we've produced guidance on both the GEARS funding and the ESSER funding so that districts have some good ideas on some ways to support their students and their schools with those funds. I see Harmony's hand again.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. So that is a very, very quick overview of some legislative things going on at both the state and federal level. I think our question for you all really is, as we continue discussions around CTE governance and funding, we really want you all to help us prioritize our next steps. What do you think are some pressing issues, concerns that might remain that need to be discussed and addressed? I will quickly mention, as you know, that we talked about in the fall, there was a legislative CTE task force that was developed at the request of the State Board of Education. They met several times through the summer and fall months. They were not able to reach consensus on some recommendations going into the 2020 general session. So there's, I think, a lot of work that remains undone that we've got to continue to advocate for. And so we welcome your feedback on what you think some of those pressing issues and concerns might be that we need to continue talking about. So I'll open the floor for any comments, responses there. Harmony?
Yes, I did raise my hand this time. I guess I didn't unraise it from last time. This is something that Kylie and I have been discussing a little bit with the dual credit task force, but I wanted to maybe note it here and we could discuss it, in the event that you all have to go back or, to NTI or something like that. We're trying to focus on making sure that all of our courses, including dual credit courses, have an online component. But it's one thing to make it available online. It's quite another for students to have access to it online. Some of which is in our control and some of which is completely out of our control. But it's not just an access issue, it's an equity issue. So I think to whatever extent we can continue to raise that point in whatever channels we have available, that, will help make sure that everybody's on equal playing fields.
Absolutely. Thank you.
To add to that, Harmony, we're sending a superintendent survey out, and that's one of the items that I put down for them to consider if they think they might have issues there with dual credit, depending on the variability of start times as compared to the post-secondary.
Sure. And, it's deeper than that too. And I speak, from the fact that my husband is a high school English teacher and had to go NTI. And I mean, even if a computer's available at home, the student might be one of 5 people using that computer to get online and not being able to do so until, 8 o'clock at night or something like that. So, I mean, it's just, there's so many issues that this crisis has highlighted for all of us. So I think it's not only internet access, it's more. Mm-hmm. That I think maybe having a focus group with students or to get a greater understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Points well taken, Harmony. Thank you. Mike, I see your hand. Mike Miller.
Hey, Leslie. I'm back up to House Bill 352. Is there mandate still in place for these ATCs, which go under local control, for them to maintain a minimum number of programs in those schools?
Great question. So we actually have a center or department that is defined in statute as having 5 or more programs. So in my personal policy opinion, I think we already have an operational definition of what classifies something as a center or a CTE department, which makes them eligible for the funding in either instance, ATC or LABEC. So I would say that there's already a definition on the books that defines that and requires it, I guess, would be my response.
Okay. Yeah, and then on the moving forward, gets to the CTE task force and Senate Bill 156, which was put forth in the last session. You know, so when I speak to my superintendents in this area, their major concern with that type of legislation going through is continued funding. Their concern is that the funding will not continue forward, and that after a year or two, if that begins to dwindle, then they're going to be forced to make cuts because of that funding piece. So there's a major concern that I'm hearing here. And not to mention the more rural schools, I think are going to suffer under that type of model because, again, of a lack of dollars and funding.
Mike, this is David. A lot of the discussion with the task force was about equity in funding because the ones that are comparatively speaking, the funding is not equitable between the ATCs and the LAVEX, and then we have some that aren't even funded. And before COVID came in, we thought we had a shot at maybe moving some funding in that direction, but we kind of lost contact with the legislative process when it got to the point they had to get together and put a budget together. So I'm thinking, and as Mike has put in the chat, that the Association of Career and Technical Education is still advocating for it. And we hope to have some to re-engage with the General Assembly when they move into the next budget cycle and try to secure more funds when a time can come that we can have more funds. So right now we're just kind of in a holding pattern until they reconvene.
I'm reading the comments from Mike Stone in the chat box, and he mentions that members have suggested consideration of developing and implementing a marketing plan to highlight the quality and relevance of CTE. We don't have time to chat about that today, but I'm really excited to tell you that we're well on our way with a new branding and communication plan for CTE that we hope to unveil in late summer, early fall. So there's some work there, and I'm glad to hear that that's meeting a need of KACTE members and that they agree that's needed, because we've wanted to address that for some time. So
Kylie, I'd say you need to get started to make sure we get your topic covered today.
Yes, sir. I don't know about saving the best for last, but since I'm last, I will go pretty quick so we can actually have a little bit of discussion on the topic. In House Bill 352, Leslie said some language was included that made some changes to LAVEC funding. That's Local Area Vocational Education Center, which is basically a CTE center run by the local district. And so get my PowerPoint working here. This is the actual language from the statute. I know that we have some people on the phone, so I normally wouldn't read, but I'm going to really fast. Included in the above general fund appropriation is $64,149,700 in fiscal year 2021 for career and technical education. Of this amount, $12,043,500 in fiscal year 2021 shall be distributed as supplemental funds to local area vocational education centers. Notwithstanding KRS 157.069 category 2 and 3 programs in districts that also enroll students at a state operated vocational education and technology center physically located in a different time zone shall be included in the distribution. Notwithstanding KRS 157.069 category 2 and 3 programs in districts established after June 21st, 2001 shall be included in the distribution if approved by the Commissioner of Education. So that's the exact language from the bill. What I will highlight for you is that of that money, $200,000 is new money in the LAVEC pot. Before that, it was $11,800,000. Now it's around $12 million. a new provision was in there that's never been in there before, and that deals with districts who are sending students to a state-run facility across time zones. In this case, on our waiting list, we had one district that meets that qualification, and really they're the only district that meets that qualification right now in the state, and that's Taylor County. And so this 200,000 would be for the addition of Taylor County to that LAVEC pot. And so for those LAVEC people that are on here today, that 200,000 is not an increase in funding. It is specifically to fund that additional school that was on the waiting list. There are other schools that are on the waiting list right now that we still are unable to fund at this point, but we're still advocating for that as we move forward. And then the last thing in the budget language that I wanted to highlight was that it does have language in there about supporting and funding centers that were established after June 21st, 2001. That's important because the legislation right now says we only fund schools that are the centers that were established before that date. And we do have some centers through budget language that have been funded after that were established after that. And so this gives us the authority to continue to fund those schools if approved by the Commissioner of Education. We have an administrative regulation right now for LAVEC that's called for by the legislation, the LAVEC legislation, and it just spells out how we allocate the funds to those centers. What I want to point out to you, because in the sake of time, is that right now we give a tentative amount in the summer, and then mid-year we change everybody's budget based on what their data shows for the current school year. So with the budget situation we're planning or expecting to be in this year, or possibly could be in this year, already looking on the darker side, we do not feel that doing a mid-year adjustment and changing everybody's budget again is in the best interest of schools and districts in their planning process this year. So we are going through the process, or plan to go through the process of requesting a waiver to this regulation to waive that tentative or that final allocation change at the mid-year. So I'm not going to read this slide to you, but basically what we're planning to ask the board is, can we just let them keep the tentative budget that we've given them this summer? That way they know exactly what their budget is all school year, as opposed to giving them a tentative and then changing all of that halfway through the school year and possibly cutting a lot of budgets multiple times. So with that, I know I've talked really fast, but what we wanted to do was just leave enough time here at the end for you to provide any feedback on that proposed waiver and on any other additional LAVEC issues that we need to consider as we move forward. So with that, I will quit talking at the speed of light and let you weigh in on that.
Thank you, Kylie. While you folks are thinking, I wanted to let our business partners online know that we are thinking about what kind of impact COVID-19 is going to have on our labor market data. Kylie and Scott work closely with KY Stats, and we're also working with KCTCS and CPE on identifying what type of industry certifications or post-secondary credentials that are going to be needed in the upcoming economy as it reopens. I just heard some discussions today that maybe as many as 100,000 early childhood centers might close, and daycares nationwide. So the way things look in February are going to be looking a lot differently, and we want to be able to pivot and move. So we appreciate any input that we could get from our business partners. So with that, are there any discussions about anything that we've talked about today? I would remind you, Kylie, would you insert the link for the exit slip again in the chat so they can find it? And we would encourage you, if you didn't feel like talking openly about some things here, we would certainly appreciate any feedback or recommendations you have before we before we close. Bam Carney, Representative Bam Carney, I saw some good news for him on Facebook. It looks like things are maybe getting better for him, and we've got his address and information here if anybody would like to reach out to him. We know everyone's prayers are with him as well as ours. I just want to thank everybody for the time. I want to thank everybody on my team for the tremendous amount of work that they've done, the support that we've received from KDE, Interim Commissioner Kevin Brown, and our board through this time, allowing us the freedom to make decisions to help improve things out there in the field with our students, and that's what we're all focused on here. Is there anyone else that would like to say anything? Otherwise, I'll adjourn this meeting and give everybody back 2 or 3 minutes of their day.
Thank you, David. Only CTE folks could go through that heavy of an agenda and get finished 3 minutes to spare.
Well, we were struggling, but we made it, and we appreciate your participation in the meeting today, Kevin. I know how busy you are.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the other side in the fall. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you all.